Maria Thompson lived a simple, unassuming life in a quiet suburban town. She wasn't the type of person who craved attention or sought to stand out in a crowd. Instead, she found joy in the little things, spending time with her 2 children, cooking meals for her family, and tending to the small garden in her backyard. Her husband, James, often joked that Maria was the glue that held their household together. He admired her calm demeanor, her unwavering patience, and her ability to make even the most mundane tasks seem meaningful. James, on the other hand, was a man who thrived in the limelight. As the owner of one of the largest car dealerships in the area, he spent his days meeting clients, negotiating deals, and ensuring his business ran smoothly. Despite his success, James never let it go to his head. He credited much of his achievements to Maria's support, often saying, "Behind every great man is an even greater woman." But Maria preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Unlike some spouses of successful businessmen, she didn't attend fancy parties or shop at high-end boutiques. Instead, she wore comfortable clothes, drove an old sedan that had seen better days, and focused on what truly mattered to her, her family. Though James repeatedly offered to buy her a new car, one that matched her personality and reflected their financial status, Maria always declined. "This old car still runs fine," she would say with a smile. "Why waste money when I don't need anything fancier?" It wasn't that Maria disliked nice things. She simply valued practicality over luxury. Her current vehicle might not have been sleek or modern, but it got her where she needed to go, and that was enough for her. One sunny afternoon, while running errands around town, Maria found herself thinking about her aging sedan. The brakes had started squeaking, the air conditioning only worked sporadically, and the engine coughed occasionally during long drives. While these issues weren't deal-breakers yet, Maria knew they wouldn't disappear on their own. Perhaps it was time for a change, she thought. Not something flashy or expensive. A reliable, fuel-efficient car would do just fine. With this idea brewing in her mind, Maria decided to visit a nearby dealership after finishing her grocery shopping. It wasn't one of James's lots, but rather a smaller, independent showroom located a few miles away. Since Maria wanted to explore options, without feeling pressured by her husband's influence, she figured this would be the perfect place to start. Plus, she reasoned, it would give her a chance to see how other dealerships operated compared to James's polished establishment. When Maria arrived at the dealership, she parked her trusty sedan and stepped out into the warm sunshine. Rows of gleaming vehicles stretched before her, each one more impressive than the last. There were sporty convertibles, rugged SUVs, luxurious sedans, and everything in between. For a moment, Maria felt overwhelmed by the sheer variety. But then, tucked away near the corner of the lot, she spotted a compact red car that caught her eye. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but its clean lines and modest design appealed to her sense of practicality. This, she thought, could be exactly what she was looking for. Feeling hopeful, Maria approached a nearby salesperson who was leaning casually against a pickup truck, scrolling through his phone. He looked up briefly as she approached, sizing her up with a quick glance before returning his attention to his screen. Undeterred, Maria cleared her throat politely and said, "Excuse me, hi. I'm interested in taking a closer look at that red car over there, the compact one. Do you think I could take it for a test drive?" The salesperson finally pocketed his phone and turned to face her fully. His expression shifted from disinterest to mild amusement as he replied, "Oh, sure, ma'am, that's a nice choice, but..." He paused, tilting his head slightly as if weighing his words carefully. "Test drives are usually handled by the primary decision makers. Is your husband joining you today? Or maybe someone else will be making the final call?" Maria blinked, momentarily taken aback by the question. Wasn't she the one standing, here expressing interest in the car? Still, she kept her tone polite as she responded, "No, it's just me today. I'm the one deciding whether or not to buy." The salesperson raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Well, I mean, these cars are significant investments. You might want to bring someone along next time, someone who can help you understand all the details." His words stung, though Maria tried not to let it show. She nodded stiffly, forcing a thin smile. "Thank you for your advice," she said, stepping back. "I'll keep that in mind." As she walked away, Maria couldn't shake the feeling of embarrassment that settled heavily in her chest. She had expected professionalism, perhaps even enthusiasm, from someone whose job it was to sell cars. Instead, she'd been met with thinly veiled condescension. The salesperson hadn't outright refused her request, but his implication was clear. He didn't take her seriously as a potential buyer. Determined not to let the experience ruin her day, Maria climbed back into her sedan and drove home. But, as she replayed the interaction in her mind, irritation began to replace her initial discomfort. Why should she have to justify her interest in a car? Why did the salesperson assume she needed someone else's approval to make a decision? These questions lingered in her thoughts long after she returned home, planting the seeds of resolve within her. If the dealership wouldn't respect her as a customer now, perhaps they needed to learn a lesson, and Maria was just the person to teach them. The following week, Maria found herself unable to stop thinking about the incident at the dealership. It wasn't just the salesperson's dismissive attitude that bothered her. It was the underlying assumption that she, as a woman, wasn't capable of making an informed decision about something as straightforward as buying a car. The more she reflected on it, the angrier she became. She knew she wasn't alone in facing such biases. Countless women had likely walked away from similar situations feeling belittled or overlooked. But Maria wasn't one to let frustration fester without taking action. She decided to return to the dealership, not out of stubbornness, but because she wanted to prove a point. If they thought she wouldn't come back, they were sorely mistaken. This time, however, she planned to approach things differently. She would go alone again, dressed casually but confidently, and make sure nothing about her appearance hinted at her connection to James or his successful dealership. No flashy jewelry, no branded accessories, just plain clothes and a quiet determination to be treated with respect. On a crisp Saturday morning, Maria set out for the dealership once more. As she drove, she rehearsed what she would say if anyone questioned her ability to make decisions. "I'm here to test drive a car," she whispered aloud, practicing her tone to sound firm yet polite. "And I don't need anyone else's permission to do so." By the time she pulled into the parking lot, she felt ready, or at least as ready as she could be, to face whatever came her way. When Maria stepped out of her sedan, she scanned the lot for a vehicle that caught her eye. Her gaze landed on a sleek blue hatchback parked near the entrance. It wasn't too big or too small, and its price range seemed reasonable based on the sticker in the window. Perfect, she thought. With renewed confidence, she approached a different salesperson this time, a younger man in a neatly pressed shirt who was arranging brochures on a display stand. "Hi there," Maria said, smiling warmly. "I'm interested in that blue hatchback over there. Could I take it for a test drive?" The young man turned to her, his expression neutral at first, but as he took in her casual attire and unassuming demeanor, his smile faltered slightly. "Oh, sure," he replied, though his tone lacked enthusiasm. "That's a great choice. Are you shopping alone today, or is someone joining you later?" Maria bristled at the question but kept her composure. "Yes, I'm here by myself," she said evenly. "And I'd like to test drive the car now, please." The salesperson hesitated, glancing toward the office as if searching for backup. Then with a forced chuckle, he said, "Well, these cars are quite an investment. Maybe you should bring someone along who can help you weigh your options. A husband, boyfriend, or even a friend. Just to make sure you're getting the best deal." Maria stared at him, incredulous. Was this really happening again? Hadn't she already proven that she was serious about buying a car? Still, she refused to let her emotions get the better of her. Taking a deep breath, she responded calmly, "Thank you for your concern, but I assure you I'm perfectly capable of deciding for myself. Now, may I please take the car for a test drive?" For a moment, the salesperson looked flustered, as if he hadn't expected her to push back. He shifted uncomfortably, then muttered something about needing to check with a manager before walking away. Maria watched him retreat, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She couldn't believe how blatantly dismissive he had been. Did they really think she wouldn't notice? Or worse, that she wouldn't care? After several minutes, the young man returned, accompanied by an older colleague who introduced himself as the assistant manager. The older man shook Maria's hand firmly, his demeanor far more professional than his subordinates had been. "Ma'am," he began, "we apologize for any inconvenience. Unfortunately, we require all test drivers to have a valid driver's license and proof of insurance on file before proceeding. Do you happen to have those documents with you?" Maria blinked, surprised by the sudden change in tactic. Of course, she had both items tucked safely in her wallet, but she couldn't help wondering if this was just another excuse to delay or discourage her. Determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her doubt herself, she nodded and handed over her license and insurance card. The assistant manager reviewed them quickly, nodding approvingly. "Everything checks out," he said, handing the documents back to her. "Let's get you set up for the test drive." Relieved but wary, Maria followed him to the blue hatchback. As she slid behind the wheel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being scrutinized, as if they expected her to struggle with even the simplest tasks. The assistant manager gave her a brief overview of the car's features, speaking slowly and deliberately as though addressing a child. Maria listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but inside, she was seething. Did they honestly think she didn't know how to operate a vehicle? Once the formalities were out of the way, Maria started the engine and eased the car onto the road. For a few minutes, she focused on driving, trying to ignore the lingering tension. But as she navigated the streets surrounding the dealership, her thoughts drifted back to the earlier interactions. Why had both salespeople assumed she needed someone else's approval? What made them think she wasn't capable of handling the process on her own? These questions swirled in her mind, fueling her growing resolve. By the time she returned to the lot, Maria had made up her mind. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about challenging the stereotypes and biases that women like her faced every day. She thanked the assistant manager politely, avoiding eye contact as she climbed out of the car. Then, without another word, she headed straight for her sedan and drove home. That evening, as she recounted the day's events to James over dinner, Maria's frustration bubbled to the surface. At first, James laughed it off, assuming she was exaggerating. "Are you sure they said all that?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe you misunderstood." But when Maria repeated the exact words used by the salespeople, his amusement faded. James prided himself on running a fair and inclusive dealership. He believed in treating every customer equally, regardless of their background or circumstances. Hearing that another dealership had treated his wife so poorly left him speechless and angry. "I can't believe they spoke to you that way," James said finally, shaking his head. "You deserve better than that." Maria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about me," she replied. "This happens to women all the time, and honestly, I think they need a wake-up call." James leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Maria smiled faintly, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "How about we pay them another visit together? Not as my husband and wife, but as two strangers looking to buy a car. Let's see how they react when you're the one asking questions." James hesitated, unsure if such deception was necessary, but Maria's determination was infectious. After a moment, he grinned. "All right," he said. "Let's teach them a lesson they won't forget." The next morning, Maria and James sat at the kitchen table, finalizing their plan over cups of steaming coffee. The idea was simple yet bold. They would return to the dealership together, but not as husband and wife. Instead, they would pose as strangers, two individuals casually shopping for a car. James would play the role of a potential buyer who happened to arrive shortly after Maria, giving the salespeople the impression that he was the decision-maker. The goal wasn't just to expose their biases, but also to demonstrate how wrong they had been to dismiss Maria. James listened intently as Maria outlined the details. "We'll arrive separately," she explained, her voice steady and confident. "I'll go in first, browse around, and ask about a test drive. Then you'll walk in a few minutes later, acting like we don't know each other. Let's see how quickly they shift their attention to you." James nodded, impressed by her thoughtfulness. "And when they try to sell me on the car instead of you?" he asked with a smirk. Maria grinned, her eyes gleaming with determination. That's when we drop the bombshell. You can reveal who you are and remind them how poorly they treated your wife. Though James still felt a twinge of unease about deceiving people, he couldn't deny the brilliance of the plan. It wasn't about revenge, it was about sending a clear message. If the dealership wanted to thrive, they needed to treat every customer with respect regardless of gender or appearance. And if this little ruse helped them understand that lesson, then it would be worth it. After breakfast, Maria and James prepared to put their plan into action. Maria dressed casually once again, opting for jeans and a simple blouse. She left her wedding ring at home, along with anything else that might hint at her connection to James. Meanwhile, James wore his usual polished attire, a tailored shirt and slacks, but carried himself with an air of casual indifference. He didn't want to appear overly eager or authoritative until the timing was right. They agreed to meet at the dealership within 10 minutes of each other. Maria left first, driving her old sedan while James followed in his own car. As they approached the lot, Maria glanced in her rearview mirror to ensure James was keeping his distance. Once satisfied, she parked near the entrance and stepped out, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. Inside the showroom, Maria wandered among the rows of vehicles, pretending to evaluate her options. Her gaze landed on a sleek silver SUV, parked prominently near the center of the lot. It was slightly larger than what she'd initially considered, but its design exuded reliability and practicality. Perfect, she thought. This would be the car she'd ask about today. A tall, broad-shouldered salesperson approached her almost immediately. His name tag read Greg, and his smile was wide but insincere. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, extending his hand. "Can I help you find something?" Maria shook his hand firmly, maintaining eye contact. "Yes, thank you. I'm interested in that silver SUV over there. Could I take it for a test drive?" Greg's smile faltered slightly, though he recovered quickly. "Of course," he replied, though his tone carried a hint of skepticism. "Are you shopping alone today, or will someone be joining you to help make the decision?" Maria resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Here we go again, she thought. Keeping her expression neutral, she responded, "I'm here by myself, but my husband is parking down the street. He'll be here in a few minutes." Greg's demeanor shifted instantly. His fake smile widened and his posture straightened. "Ah, excellent," he exclaimed, clearly relieved. "We'll get everything ready for when he arrives." Maria suppressed a grin, amused by how predictable his reaction was. Just as Greg began leading her toward the office to fill out paperwork, the sound of footsteps caught her attention. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw James enter the showroom, his presence commanding without being overtly flashy. He scanned the room briefly before spotting Maria and Greg, then strode over with a friendly wave. "Hi, sorry I'm late," James said, addressing Maria directly. "Traffic was terrible." Maria turned to him, feigning surprise. "Oh, hi. Thanks for coming. I was just telling the salesperson here that I'd like to test drive this SUV." James nodded, turning to Greg with an easy smile. "Sounds good. Let's take a look." Greg practically lit up at the sight of James. Gone was the condescending attitude he'd shown Maria moments earlier. Now he was all business, eager to impress this new arrival. "Sir, it's great to meet you," Greg gushed, shaking James's hand enthusiastically. "Your wife has excellent taste. This SUV is one of our top models, spacious, efficient, and packed with features." James raised an eyebrow, glancing at Maria with mock curiosity. "My wife, huh? Well, she does have a knack for picking winners." Maria stifled a laugh, marveling at how smoothly James had slipped into character. Greg, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the subtle dynamics unfolding before him. He ushered them toward the silver SUV, handing James the keys without hesitation. "Why don't you two hop in and I'll give you a quick overview of the controls," he suggested, his tone deferential. As Maria climbed into the passenger seat and James took the wheel, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. For the first time during this entire ordeal, no one had questioned her ability to make decisions. Instead, the focus had shifted entirely to James, exactly as she'd anticipated. Greg stood outside the vehicle, leaning against the doorframe. As he rattled off details about the engine, safety features, and fuel efficiency, James nodded politely, occasionally interjecting with questions that highlighted his expertise in the automotive industry. When Greg finished his spiel, James started the engine and eased the SUV onto the road. Maria watched silently as they drove, through the quiet suburban streets, her mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. She knew the real confrontation was still ahead, but for now, she allowed herself to savor the irony of the situation. These salespeople had underestimated her, not realizing that the man they were fawning over was none other than her husband. After a short drive, James pulled back into the dealership lot and parked the SUV. Greg greeted them eagerly, his enthusiasm undiminished. "So, what do you think?" he asked, looking directly at James. "Does it meet your expectations?" James smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "It's a nice car," he admitted. "But I think there's something you should know." Greg tilted his head, confused. "Something I should know?" James reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Greg. "My name is James Thompson," he said evenly. "I own Thompson Auto Group, and this," he gestured toward Maria, "is my wife." For a moment, Greg froze, his face pale with shock. He glanced between James and Maria, clearly struggling to process what he'd just heard. "Wait, you're together," he stammered. Maria crossed her arms, her expression calm but firm. "Yes, we are," she said. "And let me remind you, I've been here twice already asking for a simple test drive. Both times your team dismissed me because they assumed I needed my husband's approval. Does that sound like good customer service to you?" Greg opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he looked down at James's business card, his hands trembling slightly. I'm so sorry," he managed to say. "This is completely unacceptable. Please let me speak to my manager, right away." James held up a hand, silencing him. "Save the apologies for now," he said. "What matters is that you learn from this. Every customer deserves respect regardless of who they are or what they look like. If you want to succeed in this industry, you need to treat everyone equally." Maria nodded in agreement, her voice steady as she added, "It's not just about me. This kind of bias happens far too often and it needs to stop. Start by training your staff to recognize their assumptions and challenge them." Greg nodded vigorously, his earlier confidence replaced by genuine remorse. "You're absolutely right," he said. "Thank you for pointing this out. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again." As Maria and James walked away from the dealership, hand in hand, they shared a quiet moment of triumph. They hadn't sought revenge or drama, they had simply wanted to make a point. And judging by Greg's reaction, their message had been received loud and clear. As Maria and James walked away from the dealership, the weight of what had just transpired settled over them. The confrontation with Greg had been brief but impactful, leaving both of them with a mix of emotions: pride in standing up for fairness, relief that their plan had worked, and even a touch of sadness at how necessary it still was to challenge such biases. They climbed into their respective cars without saying much, each lost in their thoughts. On the drive home, Maria replayed the scene in her mind. She couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. For weeks, she'd carried the sting of being dismissed, not just as a customer but as someone capable of making decisions. Now, thanks to their clever ruse, she'd turned the tables on those who doubted her. But beneath the satisfaction, there was also frustration. Why did situations like this keep happening? Why did women have to prove themselves over and over, again in spaces where men were automatically taken seriously? When they arrived home, James suggested they sit down and talk about next steps. "What do you think should happen now?" he asked, leaning back in his chair at the kitchen table. "Do we let it go or do we push for something more?" Maria hesitated, considering her options. Part of her wanted to leave things as they were, to trust that Greg and his colleagues would learn from the experience and make meaningful changes. But another part of her knew that apologies and promises weren't enough. If they truly wanted, To create lasting change, they needed to ensure the dealership addressed its systemic issues head-on. "I think we need to take it further," Maria said finally, her voice firm. "This isn't just about one salesperson or one bad interaction. It's about patterns of behavior that harm people every day. We can't walk away until we know they're committed to fixing those problems." James nodded, understanding completely. He admired Maria's determination, not just to stand up for herself but to advocate for others who might not have the same opportunity to speak out. Together, they decided to escalate the matter by contacting the dealership's owner directly. If anyone could enforce real accountability, it would be the person at the top. The following day, Maria drafted an email outlining her experiences. She kept the tone professional but unflinching, detailing each instance of dismissive behavior she'd encountered. She included specific quotes from the salespeople, emphasizing how their words reflected deeper biases. At the end of the email, she made a simple request: mandatory sensitivity training for all staff members, along with clear policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. James reviewed the draft before Maria sent it, offering minor suggestions to strengthen the message. "You've got a way with words," he told her with a proud smile. "This is perfect." Once the email was sent, Maria felt a surge of nervous anticipation. Would the owner take her concerns seriously? Or would they brush them off as an isolated incident? She didn't have to wait long for an answer. Within hours, her phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. When she answered, a deep, authoritative voice greeted her. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Robert Carter, the owner of Carter Auto Sales. I understand you recently visited our dealership, and I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received." Maria blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. "Thank you for reaching out," she replied cautiously. "I appreciate your willingness to address this." Robert went on to explain that he had already spoken with Greg and other staff members involved in the incidents. While he expressed genuine regret for what had happened, he also admitted that he hadn't fully grasped the extent of the problem until reading Maria's email. "Your perspective has opened my eyes," he said earnestly. "We pride ourselves on providing excellent service, but clearly we've fallen short. I'd like to invite you and your husband to meet with me so we can discuss how to move forward." Maria glanced at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. "That sounds reasonable," she said. "When would be a good time for you?" They agreed to meet 2 days later at the dealership. In preparation, Maria and James brainstormed ideas for concrete actions the dealership could take to improve its culture. They researched examples of successful diversity and inclusion initiatives from other businesses, compiling a list of recommendations to present during the meeting. Their goal wasn't to shame the dealership, but to offer practical solutions that would benefit everyone, from employees to customers. On the day of the meeting, Maria and James arrived early, dressed professionally to convey the seriousness of their intentions. Robert greeted them warmly, ushering them into a private office where refreshments awaited. Despite the tension hanging in the air, the atmosphere remained respectful and cordial. "First, let me say how sorry I am for what you experienced," Robert began, his expression somber. "It's unacceptable, and it doesn't reflect the values I strive to uphold in my business. Please know that I'm committed to making things right." Maria nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Thank you for acknowledging the issue," she said. "But words alone aren't enough. What matters most is action." With that, James took over, presenting their list of recommendations. Among them were proposals for regular sensitivity training sessions, anonymous feedback systems for customers to report discrimination, and incentives for staff who demonstrated exceptional inclusivity in their interactions. They also suggested appointing a diversity officer within the company to oversee these efforts and ensure accountability. Robert listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. By the end of the discussion, he seemed genuinely inspired by their ideas. "This is exactly the kind of guidance I needed," he admitted. "I'll implement these changes immediately and keep you updated on our progress. You've given me a roadmap to becoming a better leader and a better business." As they wrapped up the meeting, Robert extended his gratitude once again. "You didn't have to come here and fight for this," he said. But because you did, you've helped us grow. Thank you for holding us accountable." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't expected. "It's not about blame," she replied. "It's about learning and improving. That's all any of us can hope for." Driving home together, Maria and James reflected on the outcome. While they knew the road to true equality was long and fraught with challenges, moments like this reminded them of the power of standing up for what's right. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but every step forward mattered. And if their actions inspired even one person to challenge bias or demand respect, then it had all been worth it. In the days following their meeting with Robert Carter, the owner of the dealership, Maria and James found themselves reflecting deeply on what had transpired. Though they felt a sense of accomplishment, they also knew that real change required more than just promises. It needed consistent effort, accountability, and time. They were cautiously optimistic about the steps Robert had committed to taking, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger conversation. Word of the incident spread quickly through the dealership. Employees whispered among themselves during breaks, some defensive and others embarrassed by the scrutiny. Greg, the salesperson who had initially dismissed Maria, became particularly withdrawn. He avoided eye contact with customers, clearly shaken by the realization that his actions had caused harm. Meanwhile, Robert wasted no time in implementing the changes he'd discussed with Maria and James. Within a week, he hired a consultant, specializing in diversity and inclusion training, to conduct workshops for all staff members. Posters promoting inclusivity and respect were placed throughout the showroom, and an anonymous feedback system was introduced to allow customers to share their experiences without fear of retaliation. Despite these efforts, not everyone at the dealership welcomed the changes. Some employees grumbled under their breath, claiming the measures were unnecessary or overly harsh. "We're not monsters," one mechanic muttered to a colleague. "Why are we being treated like criminals?" Others, however, embraced the opportunity to grow. A young receptionist named Lisa attended the training sessions eagerly, realizing how often she had unconsciously perpetuated stereotypes in her own interactions. By the end of the first workshop, she approached Robert to express her gratitude. "I never realized how my words could affect someone else," she admitted. "Thank you for showing us a better way." Maria followed up with Robert regularly, checking in to see how things were progressing. Each call brought updates, attendance records from the training sessions, early results from the feedback system, and even anecdotes of positive customer interactions. One story stood out in particular. A single mother visiting the dealership had been greeted warmly by a salesperson who went above and beyond to ensure she felt respected and valued. She later wrote a glowing review online, praising the staff for their professionalism and kindness. When Robert shared this with Maria, she felt a swell of pride, not just for herself but for the entire team working toward improvement. Meanwhile, Maria began opening up about her experience outside the confines of the dealership. At first, it was casual conversations with friends and neighbors over coffee or at school events. But soon, her story gained traction. Someone posted about it on social media, tagging Maria in a heartfelt post that highlighted the importance of challenging gender bias in everyday life. The response was overwhelming. Women from all walks of life reached out to share their own stories of discrimination, whether at car dealerships, in workplaces, or elsewhere. Many thanked Maria for speaking out, saying her courage gave them hope and encouragement to stand up for themselves too. Inspired by the outpouring of support, Maria decided to take her advocacy further. With James's encouragement, she started a small blog called Driving Change, where she wrote about her experiences and offered advice for navigating situations involving bias. Her posts ranged from practical tips, how to handle being dismissed, as a customer, to reflective essays, why we need to keep talking about gender bias. Over time, the blog gained a loyal following, drawing readers not only from her local community, but from across the country. One evening, after finishing a new blog post, Maria sat back in her chair and sighed contentedly. Writing had become therapeutic for her, a way to process her emotions while inspiring others. James walked into the room, holding 2 cups of tea. "Another masterpiece?" he teased, handing her a mug. Maria chuckled softly. "Something like that," she replied. "I'm writing about something bigger now, the ripple effect of standing up for yourself. It's amazing how one action can lead to so many others." James nodded thoughtfully. "You've always been brave, Maria, even when you didn't realize it." Their conversation turned to the future. While Maria was proud of what she'd accomplished, she knew there was still work to be done, not just within the automotive industry but everywhere biases persisted. She began brainstorming ways to expand her impact, perhaps partnering with organizations focused on women's empowerment or speaking at local events to raise awareness. Whatever path she chose, James promised to stand by her side every step of the way. As weeks turned into months, the dealership continued its transformation. Customers noticed the difference almost immediately. Salespeople greeted everyone with equal enthusiasm, regardless of age, gender, or appearance. Test drives were offered freely, no questions asked. And behind the scenes, employees participated in ongoing discussions about fairness and respect, learning to recognize and challenge their own assumptions. Greg, once the poster child for dismissive behavior, emerged as one of the most vocal advocates for change. After attending multiple training sessions, he approached Maria during one of her follow-up visits to personally apologize once again. "I can't undo what I did," he said sincerely, "but I want you to know I'm trying. I don't ever want anyone to feel the way you did because of me." Maria smiled gently, touched by his sincerity. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, and even more to try to do better." By the end of the year, the dealership had earned recognition as one of the most inclusive businesses in the region. Local news outlets featured stories about its turnaround, highlighting the role Maria and James had played in sparking meaningful change. Robert credited their intervention as a turning point, calling them true catalysts for progress during an interview. For Maria, the journey had been transformative. What began as a frustrating encounter at a car dealership had evolved into a mission to challenge stereotypes and promote equality. Along the way, she'd discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed: her resilience, her ability to inspire others, and her unwavering belief in fairness. Though she remained humble, refusing to see herself as anything other than an ordinary woman, those around her recognized her extraordinary impact. And yet, despite all the accolades and attention, Maria stayed grounded. She returned to her quiet life, cherishing the simple joys that had always mattered most: spending time with her family, tending to her garden, and driving her newly purchased crossover SUV, a modest vehicle that symbolized not just reliability, but freedom. For Maria, it represented the power of standing up for oneself and proving that even the simplest acts of defiance could drive monumental change. Months had passed since Maria's initial visit to the dealership, and life in her small suburban town seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle but profound changes were taking root, not just at the dealership, but in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed or been touched by Maria's story. Her quiet determination had sparked a ripple effect that extended far beyond what she could have imagined. Maria continued writing for Driving Change, her blog becoming a beacon of hope for women facing similar challenges. Each post resonated deeply with readers, many of whom shared their own stories in the comments section or sent private messages expressing gratitude. One woman wrote about how Maria's words gave her the courage to confront a dismissive mechanic who refused to explain car repairs to her directly. Another recounted how she used Maria's advice during a frustrating encounter at a furniture store, insisting on being treated as an equal decision-maker alongside her husband. These stories poured in daily, each one reinforcing Maria's belief that standing up for oneself wasn't just empowering, it was contagious. Her growing influence caught the attention of local community groups, which invited her to speak at events focused on gender equality and empowerment. At first, Maria hesitated, unsure if she was the right person for such a platform. "I'm not an expert," she told James one evening, scrolling through the latest invitation on her phone. "I'm just someone who stood up for herself, people might expect more than I can give. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You don't have to be perfect to inspire others, he said. Sometimes it's the ordinary moments that make the biggest impact. Encouraged by his faith in her, Maria accepted the invitations. Her talks were simple yet heartfelt, filled with personal anecdotes and practical advice. She spoke candidly about her experiences at the dealership, emphasizing the importance of self-worth and resilience. Change starts with us, she often said, her voice steady and warm. When we demand respect, we create space for others to do the same. The response to her speeches was overwhelmingly positive. Women approached her after events, tears in their eyes, thanking her for giving them the tools and confidence to challenge biases in their own lives. Men, too, expressed appreciation, admitting they hadn't fully understood the extent of these issues until hearing Maria's perspective. Some even promised to examine their own behaviors, vowing to become allies in the fight for equality. Meanwhile, James watched with pride as his wife blossomed into a role model for their children. Their daughter Emily, now 12, began asking questions about fairness and equality, inspired by her mother's courage. If someone treats me unfairly because I'm a girl, what should I do? She asked one afternoon while helping Maria bake cookies in the kitchen. Maria paused, considering her answer carefully. You stand up for yourself, she replied, sliding a tray of dough into the oven. But remember, standing up doesn't always mean yelling or arguing. Sometimes it's about staying calm and showing them you won't back down. And if they still don't listen, find people who will support you, like your family, friends, or teachers. Emily nodded thoughtfully, clearly processing her mother's words. Later that evening, she proudly announced at dinner that she wanted to start a club at school called Girls Can Do Anything. Both Maria and James exchanged proud smiles, knowing their daughter was learning valuable lessons about confidence and advocacy. As winter approached, Maria received an unexpected email from Robert Carter, the dealership owner. Attached was a report detailing the progress his team had made over the past year. Increased customer satisfaction ratings, a significant rise in female buyers, and glowing testimonials praising the staff's inclusivity. But what truly caught Maria's eye was the final section, a proposal to establish an annual award named after her, the Maria Thompson Advocacy Award. It would recognize individuals within the automotive industry who demonstrated exceptional commitment to promoting fairness and respect. Maria read the email aloud to James, her voice trembling slightly. Do you think I deserve this? She asked, looking up at him. James chuckled softly. Deserve it? You earned it. This is their way of saying thank you for pushing them to be better. Though honored, Maria felt conflicted. She had never sought recognition for her actions. Her goal had always been to drive change, not to receive accolades. Still, she recognized the potential impact of such an award. If it encouraged others to advocate for equality, then accepting it aligned perfectly with her mission. At the inaugural ceremony held at the dealership, Maria stood before a crowd of employees, customers, and community members. Dressed in a modest yet elegant outfit, she delivered a speech that brought both laughter and tears. This award isn't just for me. It's for everyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated unfairly, she said, her voice strong and clear. It's a reminder that our voices matter, and when we use them, we can create a world where no one feels invisible. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the showroom long after Maria stepped away from the podium. As she mingled with attendees afterward, shaking hands and posing for photos, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had been worth it. In the months that followed, Maria's advocacy expanded beyond her blog and speaking engagements. She collaborated with local schools to develop workshops for students on topics like self-confidence, leadership, and challenging stereotypes. She partnered with organizations dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs, sharing her story as a testament to the power of perseverance. And though she remained humble, refusing to see herself as anything other than an ordinary woman, those around her celebrated her extraordinary contributions. One crisp spring morning, as Maria drove her crossover SUV to pick up groceries, she reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day at the dealership. What started as a simple desire for a test drive had transformed into a movement, one that challenged biases, inspired others, and reminded everyone of the importance of treating each other with dignity and respect. Though she knew there was still work to be done, Maria felt hopeful. Progress, she realized, wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. And so, Maria continued living her quiet, unassuming life, savoring the little things that brought her joy. But now, whenever she passed by a car dealership or saw a young woman confidently negotiating a deal, she allowed herself a small smile. Somewhere, somehow, her actions had planted a seed, and she knew that seed would keep growing, spreading roots of change across generations to come.